Amen. This week I was chatting with one of my friends, good friends, who is not a believer. And he's got one of these lives that everyone's really jealous of, I think. He just seems to have everything together. He got a great degree from the University of Oxford. He's got a lovely big detached house with a garden, which at times like this we're even more jealous of. And he is got a car for him and his wife. He's got kids as well. And he's got an extra car, sports car, why not? He's got the money. And everything seems to be going brilliantly. At least it was until about 2 months ago. His money in shares and stocks have taken a big hit. And he's beginning to realize with this coronavirus that this heaven that he was building up for himself is beginning to be shaken, and he's now really worried, so much so he's beginning to have panic attacks, and he's uncertain and he's hurting. And yet it's so hard to be harsh on my friend. He's doing so many good things. He's worked hard for his degree. He is intelligent. He's putting his brains to use in a good job. He's trying to provide for his family. He's just got so many good things. But yet he's realizing now that his base on which he was building his life on is so weak, so shaken. And so as I was talking to him, I was just thinking about really needs to find a base that can stand any economic fluctuations, that can stand any quarantine. Wouldn't it be great if he could find a base that could stand even when his loved ones are no longer there, or even when he is no longer there? Where is his hope? Is there any hope? This morning, I would like to answer that with a resounding yes, there is. And we're going to look at that verse which Yori talked on this morning. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And hopefully you're here because you want, and you believe this as well. You want to discover a bit more. What does this mean in days like this? Well, the first point I want to bring out from this is Jesus is big enough. The image that really comes to mind when we think of the light of the world is the sun. And I love this beautiful quote by Thomas Adam, nearly 2 centuries ago. Christ is to the soul what the sun is to all nature. And so I've just been pulling this out. What does this mean that Jesus is the light of the world? And so, first point, he illuminates others, but is not illuminated by others. The sun illuminates others, the physical sun, but is not illuminated. To remember Yori's children's talk, for example, you don't need to shine a torch on the sun. The idea is ridiculous, isn't it? The sun does not need illumination by other things. It is so strong. It is capable of illuminating everything else. Even the moon, the next brightest luminary in the sky, is bright because of the sun. And in the same way, Jesus, he's not depending on others to be illuminated, to learn things. He won't say to me at the end of this sermon, "Oh, Paul, you raised a few good points I'd just not thought about. Thank you for that." Like, the idea is ridiculous. He's the one who illuminates us. He's not illuminated by others. I wrote a whole bunch of these. I just had fun. The sun warms things literally on this earth. And so Jesus warms our souls as we meet with him. Perhaps you glimpsed a bit of that in worship as you just lifted your eyes to heaven. Perhaps you glimpse a bit of that when you read the Bible or in prayer, how he can catch us up, how he warms our hearts. He causes growth. The sun, the ball of fire, causes growth. Photosynthesis in plants. On humans, it produces vitamin D and therefore serotonin in our bodies, which makes us feel happy, basically. And it causes growth in the same way God causes growth in us, in perhaps two ways. Firstly, the Father and the Son, they um, inspire us, they teach us, they show us the way. But then in a second way, the Spirit lives within us and he motivates us and excites us and points us in the right direction. Triune God causes growth too. He's strong enough to be our light. Here is a picture of the sun with various planets, and I've put an arrow by the Earth so that you can see it, because I wasn't sure how well this would show up. But you can just see how much bigger the sun is than the Earth. So Jesus is so much bigger and so much stronger than any of us. We know this because the sun that he created, that looks to us so massive and so big, and that ball of fire, he created, according to astronomers, about, estimates are at the moment, about 100 million trillion of them. So clearly it didn't stress him, just as the ball of fire is strong enough to be our light. So Jesus is strong enough to be our light. It is needed, he is needed for life. I did a bit of research in astronomy, not my strongest suit, so bear with me. But I looked at what people thought the effect would be if the sun disappeared tomorrow. And they reckon within a week, temperatures would drop to below zero. Within a year to below 50 degrees Celsius. And that life itself would just completely stop to exist. It would be impossible at those temperatures. But more than that, if the sun stopped existing tomorrow, actually the Earth's stable orbit around the sun would be affected and it would fly off dangerously into space. And so even if the human race didn't die from the temperature, sooner or later it could smash into another planet. The sun gives us stability in our orbit as well. So Jesus is needed for life, spiritual life and eternal life. He's paid the price for sin so that we can be forgiven by God and go to heaven. The sun is bright with no competitor. I carried on my astronomical explorations and looked up the nearest brightest star in the universe to see how much light we would get if there were no sun. And the nearest star in the universe points to you if you know what this is. Apparently is called Sirius. And the sun is only about 13 billion times brighter than Sirius. So if we had no sun, we would certainly be in the darkness. In the same way that the sun has no competitor, it's the only one there. So Jesus has no competitor. There's no other religious leaders who even claim what Jesus claims. There's certainly none of them that have proved it by dying and rising from the dead. He stands in a category of one. Finally, he is dependable. And the sun is dependable. It's constantly there. It's been there for so many years. And so Jesus is dependable. He was there even before Christ, 0 AD, if you like, working in the Old Testament. He's stable enough. So my first point really was Jesus is big enough, just as the sun is big enough. These are just 7 points. I'm sure there are many more, but this was just to get us started. Jesus is big enough. Second point, Jesus is stable enough. And here I'm going to change lines in some way. And I want to look more at the context in which Jesus spoke these words. Because actually he was at this Feast of Tabernacles. We learn this from John 7, verse 2. If you have a Bible there. The Feast of Tabernacles was a feast to celebrate the harvest, the fact that crops have come in, and to celebrate it, people came to Jerusalem and they lived in tents. So they would build these tents out of twigs to remind themselves that that is how God brought them out of Egypt. And During this feast, at night, there were 4 great lamps that were lit in the temple courtyard, in the women's courts. And these lights were said to be so bright that it illuminated the whole city. And people would come in and temple musicians would play and people would dance. And it'd be a real time of celebration of just how good God is. So when Jesus said on the last day of this feast, I am the light of the world, it is quite possible a number of them thought back to how brightly illuminated Jerusalem was by these massive lamps and how much joy that brought them, the dancing, the singing, the fun. And so when they heard that, they might have gone, yeah, that celebratory atmosphere, that party of fun, that's Jesus. That may seem really strange to you. How can Jesus in some way be fun? Isn't Christianity all about being serious? And just, and you do things because they're right, but you don't particularly enjoy it. I don't think so. There is discipline. I'm not saying that Christianity is not doesn't require self-control, or it is not hard at times, or bad things, difficult moments don't come. But it transforms how we can deal with them. I remember when I wasn't a Christian, and I used to care so much what people thought of me because they were the most important people in my life. And when I became a Christian, I discovered God accepted me. There was a new most important person in my life. And it left me freer in how I engaged with people, to be me in my weirdness, in my particularities. And, that worked out in weird ways. So I remember in my love life, before I was a Christian, I would desperately try to get girls to be interested in me. And it was embarrassing how little they were, or how unsuccessful I was, let me say. And then I became a Christian, and I found hope and light in God. And weirdly, some girls would start coming to me and showing interest. And now it was me who was like, I'm not sure I'm so interested in you. It's part of what Jesus does in us, how he can lift us up, how he can lead us towards a fuller life. He can enable fun. But more. Secondly, and we're going to go, he will keep us safe. In context, John 6, Jesus has just said, I am the bread of life. And he uses this image of manna from heaven. And anyone who knew their Old Testament remembered the Exodus wanderings in the wilderness, where God provided manna, bread for his people. So that was John 6. In John 7, Jesus just talked about being the living water. Again, anyone who knew their Old Testament would think, hang on, in the wilderness, Moses struck a rock and water came out to give his people something to drink. We've got one image from John 6 of the bread from the wilderness, one in John 7 of water. Now we get John 8, I am the light of the world. And if you knew your Old Testament, you would remember in the wilderness, God guided his people by a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud in the day. So when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, they were to remember this and wonder, oh, this is the God who guided us and who could keep us safe. And he did keep them safe in the Old Testament. He protected them from harms, from animals, from attacks. And in the same way, Jesus keeps us safe now. He keeps us safe spiritually now from the attacks of the devil and demons, and he will keep us safe physically forever in heaven. He doesn't actually promise to keep us physically safe now, otherwise no believers would ever get persecuted for their faith, or no believers would ever get coronavirus. But he does promise spiritual protection. That may not seem so great to some of you, but for those of us who've grown up in backgrounds that are not Christian but are spiritual, this is really precious. I have a friend who was deeply involved in black magic, and when people caused her trouble at school, she knew how to cast spells and get her own back, in certain ways. She would regularly have these guides she contacted, and one day somebody shared the gospel with her, and she responded. She became a Christian, but she was so terribly afraid. But what about these guides that are so powerful and they're stronger than me and I know what they can do? They don't want me to turn to Jesus. She didn't realize initially, but there's a hierarchy of God, other spiritual powers, and us. We're united to the living God, to Jesus, the light of the world. He will keep us safe. As she turned to Jesus, she said, it made a big difference. But, one day she was at school, she saw these spirit guides, and she said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And she discovered the truth of the words in the New Testament: resist the devil and he will flee from you. Jesus is the light of the world, and he will keep us safe from the devil and any spiritual attacks of that sort. Thirdly, he also promised to guide us. The pillar of fire at night was not just stationary in the cloud during the day, it led the people through the wilderness. And so Jesus, when he says he is the light of the world, he wants to guide us through life. That can seem confusing to some Christians who go, but what decision am I meant to make here? Should I take this job or not? How am I meant to solve this problem? And we pray to God for an answer, and we don't always get the quick answer we want. How does he guide us if we don't always get those immediate answers? Well, I think one of the ways Jesus wants to be the light of the world and wants to guide us is not by being like Aladdin's lamp, where you rub it and then a genie appears and you make your request and he grants it. God doesn't want to be like that Aladdin's lamp that you just rub when you need a specific answer. He wants to so shape and form our characters so that as we face various situations, we know what is best to do because our minds have been formed by his word. And so that's not to say he doesn't answer specifically at times, he does. But actually, more than just being that one we rub when we desperately need an answer, he wants us to come to him at all times, to be shaped, to be changed, so that we will be formed by him, shaped by him, guided by him. All of these ideas I titled as Jesus is Stable Enough, because they all have this imagery, both from the Feast of Tabernacles, the Old Testament, reminding us of how God has constantly been with his people and guided them. Jesus is trustworthy. He is stable enough. Thirdly, Jesus is interested enough to want to lead you. You may say, well, I know Jesus is interested enough to lead Christians. I hear them talking about his praise, but perhaps I'm not a Christian. Does he really care about me? Well, yes, and I've quoted the full verse here because I want to make a couple of comments on it. It said, when Jesus spoke again to the people, literally to them in the Greek, and the people around him weren't all his followers. Indeed, the very next verse, if you're looking in a Bible, you'll see the Pharisees come back to him. And the Pharisees were his biggest skeptics. They did not like Jesus. And it's interesting because Jesus said these words in their hearing. See, Jesus, he didn't just want to have a debate with his skeptics. He wanted them to see what he was offering. I am the light of the world, he said. And it's almost as if he was reaching out to his skeptics, going, if you won't have me as the light of the world, what or who is your light of your world that is strong enough to carry you through death and through whatever comes next? It's funny, his supporters might have expected him to say, I am the light of the Jewish nation. That's what they were expecting the Messiah to be. But Jesus doesn't. He goes, I am the light of the world. You know, I looked on Google in preparing for the sermon to see if anyone else has dared say something like that. And I couldn't find it. So I typed in light and Donald Trump to see if anything came up. But Donald Trump wouldn't even say he's the light of America. I got a quote from him saying, with coronavirus, there is light at the end of the tunnel. But nobody claims to be the light, even for their nation, it seems. Jesus claimed to be the light of the world. Notice how wide the offer is. Whoever follows me, whoever, anyone, will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. He doesn't want you to live like my friend at the start, perhaps trying to find things that will hang together for the remaining perhaps 10, 20 years that he has left in bodily health. He wants a hope that's far more stable for you, one that will last, one that can't be quarantined, one that no virus can ruin or take away. He wants something that can smash through the worst that life can throw at you and get you through death as well, so that just as the flowers are blossoming outside, so this hope will blossom in your heart and come to full fruition in life eternal, everlasting life. Do you know that hope? Jesus wants to be your light of the world. I think Jesus as light of the world just means you renounce hopes in other things that just weren't working anyway. Recognize you've been hoping in vain things or things that can only last a couple of decades at best. And you come and you sort out the key thing in your life. Jesus wants you to do that. You know, this last week, a friend of mine in Milan, a few of you know as well, actually died. And if this coronavirus quarantine should be doing anything to us, it's really sobering us up and making us realize, okay, come on, look, we're now shut away. This is the time. Let us sort out where we're going once and for all. How are we going to stand before our Creator at the end? How are we going to come through that? The early Christians put their trust in Jesus as the light of the world because they saw him smash through death. And that is why they saw he was trustworthy. Will you come and bow the knee before him and make Jesus the light of your world?